let's see, the Syria Israel indirect talks.
Just very
I just
quickly,
don't want
because
to
we're
talk.
coming up. I just
Yeah.
wanted to point out some developments here. That yesterday, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, aka Ahmad al-Sharaa, the so-called president of Syria, don't remember anyone electing him. We were told that the previous government was overthrown for not being democratic.
Hmm.
No talk of elections now, but he was welcomed in Paris by Emmanuel Macron, the president there at the Elysee Palace. I just thought it was very ironic that that al-Jolani, who was previously a senior aide to the leader of ISIS, was received in Paris 10 years after the horrific Bataclan attack and the Nice attacks, which were attributed to ISIS, seems to be water under the bridge as far as the French are concerned. Whether ISIS was really behind those attacks, who knows now? ISIS seems to be very close to Western governments, as seen here by this handshake. And what Jolani confirmed during his press conference with Macron is what had been reported a little bit earlier in the day, that that Syria or his purported government of Syria are in indirect talks with Israel, and it was reported separately that those are being mediated by the United Arab Emirates, which of course is a very close ally of Israel. So all of this is very predictable. That none of what many people hoped would come to pass in Syria has come to pass. No sanctions have been lifted. No reconstruction is happening. No investment is coming in. And that's because the US will not lift any sanctions on Syria, if it ever does, until Syria is turned into a Syrian version of the Palestinian Authority,
Yeah.
simply an entity with no real sovereignty, whose government is allowed to exist only as long as it protects and serves Israel. So we will likely see Jolani and others continuing to grovel and pander to Israel in the hope of stabilizing their rule. And the result will likely be, my prediction is, the more they give, the more will be demanded of them.
Yep.
That's the pattern.
Yep.
That's quite a good analogy that you've made with the Palestinian Authority and Syria, Ali. So something I hadn't thought of before, but it's quite apt because what we've seen since the former Al Qaeda affiliate took over Syria is really a kind of dismantling of any Syrian state in a lot of ways. Certainly of the Syrian military and of Syrian defenses and so forth, and of the taking over of more and more Syrian land, the occupation of more Syrian land by Israel. So their authority is increasingly lessened. The Palestinian Authority has always been a bit of a misnomer because it has very little authority and it's not really Palestinian in the sense that it doesn't serve actual Palestinian aspirations and interests.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about who this uh, we showed a screen grab of the article that Omar Karmi wrote. No, no, that you did, that you wrote. Meet Israel's man in Ramallah. Talk about who al-Sheikh is and why it's significant.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Well, a few weeks ago, the Palestinian Authority announced and appointed a vice president for the first time. This man you can see on the right of the screen here, Hussein al-Sheikh. And he is, the Palestinian Authority really has been a collaborationist authority. It's really Israel's Palestinian Authority is probably one of the most apt way to describe it because it has always, since its inception in the early 90s, played a role in enforcing the Israeli occupation and collaborating with Israeli occupation soldiers. Hussein al-Sheikh, so he's been appointed as this new position, vice president. Complete again, like Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, a completely unelected position. And this position has never actually existed before within the Palestinian Authority. It's kind of invented for him. And he's a former colonel in the preventative security, the so-called preventative security, one of the Palestinian Authority's many armed agencies, which is implicated in torture and other human rights abuses. And he's really been appointed at this time and is being lined up as the successor to Mahmoud Abbas, whose term as the so-called president of the Palestinian Authority expired more than 16 years ago, and who has repeatedly cancelled elections, and all the polls show that he would almost certainly lose those elections, so he just simply cancelled them. And in this article, I read a piece in Foreign Policy, the sort of in-house journal of US imperialism in a lot of ways. There's a very long and kind of glowing profile of Hussein al-Sheikh from July 2023 that I go through some analysis of in that. I mean, it's kind of a puff piece, but it has some interesting insights. And the most revealing one is in it quote the journalist, the foreign policy journalist, quote a unnamed former senior intelligence officer, Israeli intelligence officer, who still was at the time of the publication of the article active as a reservist in Israeli intelligence. And the standout quote there is he describes Hussein al-Sheikh as, quote, our man in Ramallah. Ramallah, of course, being the West Bank city, which is kind of the de facto capital of the Palestinian Authority. So it's an interesting article. It was interesting to research. And you mentioned our colleague Omar Karmi, who does a lot of the groundwork on a lot of very good analysis on the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
And he's also written a very good piece about recently, and another one actually, I think came out yesterday or today, about how the Palestinian Authority has lost any form of
popular legitimacy.
That it may have ever had.
Yeah.
And
They'll go ahead, Ali.
So I just wanted to come back to something Asa said earlier, just to give a bit of historical perspective for this. So, Mahmoud Abbas, of course, is the chief enforcer on behalf of Israel. He and his forces, which are American trained, Western funded, work closely with Israel to try to crush resistance to Israel in the West Bank. But Abbas is not in good health and he's in advanced age, and so, as Asa said, they're looking for a succession. And it's very reminiscent of how the US sidelined Yasser Arafat in order to install Mahmoud Abbas, because back in, when was it, 2003 or so, when the US was getting fed up, the US and Israel were getting fed up with Arafat, not because Arafat wasn't going along with their plans, but because he wasn't going along with them far enough and fast enough. Yeah. And so they invented the position of prime minister in the Palestinian Authority to install Mahmoud Abbas and basically to compete with Arafat and eventually replace him, which is what happened after Arafat died under very mysterious circumstances, was almost certainly poisoned, as the investigations of Clayton Swisher over many years, I think, established with a great degree of credibility. That's all been memory hold. And then Mahmoud Abbas was put in place. Now they want to sideline and replace Mahmoud Abbas. And so they invented this position of vice president, which has no basis in the Palestinian basic law. And even if it did, I mean, they don't even pretend to care about democracy or consulting Palestinians. It's just whoever Israel and the United States install. And that's what we see going on here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not as if Abbas wasn't serving their interests
No.
adequately. The most infamously that he described collaboration or so-called security coordination with the Israelis as sacred,
Yeah.
many years ago. And as recently as last year, Benjamin Netanyahu himself said that, quote, "We need the Palestinian Authority. We cannot allow it to collapse," and that the Palestinian Authority does our job for us. And really, the concerns to replace Mahmoud Abbas is simply that if he sort of stubbornly stayed in place until his likely death, he's 89 years old, said to be in ill health, there's a very high likelihood that the Palestinian Authority would collapse. In one of the articles that Omar wrote, he is talking about how there is rumors of competing forces within Fatah stockpiling weapons around the West Bank. So we could see this kind of intra-Palestinian Authority fallout after Mahmoud Abbas's death with no clear successor in place. That's what his backers are trying to avoid by installing this man.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for diving into that, Asa. And as you mentioned, our colleague Omar has some recent reports, including right there at the top of the page at electronicintifada.net, an interview, really incredible interview, over an hour, with our contributor Abdeljawad Omar at Birzeit University in the occupied West Bank, and they go into the history of PA collaboration with Israel and the U.S., as well as kind of focusing in on as you mentioned, the legitimacy, what remains of the legitimacy of the PA within Palestinian civil society. So it's a really incredible interview, and I encourage our audience to give that a listen or a watch. And we have so much on the Electronic Intifada right now, all of our features by our writers in Gaza. We have a feature by an activist in the West Bank as well. We have, just extraordinary numbers of. And there's, of course, our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy's monthly feature, The Return of Palestinian Pictures. So for the month of April, just really
And
moving photographs and essay. Yeah.
yeah, extraordinary work by photographers in
Yeah.
Gaza
Yeah.
and in the West Bank as well, but just extraordinary images that I think are worth looking at and contemplating,
Yeah.
because I think we're all overwhelmed by constant video. I'm not denigrating video, it's a very important medium, but I think these images capture reality in a way that really confronts one with the horror of what the world is allowing to do, plus a really thorough, meticulously reported text summarizing what has been happening in Palestine over the last month. So we're very grateful to Maureen for this incredibly valuable feature, and of course to all the photographers in Palestine whose work is featured here.
Yeah, absolutely. So go to electronicintifada.net to read all of our new features and news posts and podcast episodes, et cetera, et cetera. Also to sign up, get our daily email digest right there. If you click on Get Updates at the top left, at the top right, if you have some money that you'd like to donate to keep this platform alive and vibrant, go to the Donate Now link at the top right. And I think that's it.
We're very grateful to all the people who support us financially, who can, and I know not everyone who can, which makes it even more important for those who can to do so, because you make all this work available to everyone.